Hey guys, my name is Wes, and I just got done listening to the Distractions podcast where, Andrew, you were talking about putting your phone on airplane mode. And that was really challenging for me in that over the last 2 years, I've had to have two phones, my personal phone and a phone that my work has issued to me that I have to have on 24 hours a day. It's bulging both of my pockets having both these phones. And then I've got a boss that expects that I respond to a text within 30 minutes and an email within 3 to 4 hours. So I started to think, like, what if I did put it on airplane mode? What if I didn't respond during that time? Am I okay with disappointing my boss? And then I started to think even deeper of all of our relationships. You know, if a loved one or a spouse, if we're away from home, or somebody else is texting us and we've got our phones on airplane mode, am I okay with disappointing others? And so my question really is, do you see ways where Jesus disappointed people because he was not readily available to them? And then if so, how can we be as available or unavailable as he was in his life? Thanks, guys. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, thanks, Wes, for that question. And it's really, really encouraging to hear people like listening to the episodes and then having questions that are based on things that they've heard there. So just to summarize, the question was, do you see instances of Jesus disappointing people because he was not readily available to them? And if so, how can we be available or unavailable as he was in his life? And the quick answer is yes, Jesus definitely disappointed some people by not being available to them. The immediate instances that jump to my mind is there was a time where his family were waiting to see him. They couldn't get to him because there were so many people listening to him teach the message. And I have to think that they were disappointed. Jesus' response, if you remember, is that, they told him, your mother and your brothers are here. They're wanting to see you. And he looks at his disciples and he says, behold, my mother and my brothers. And so Jesus chose to be available to this group of people, which caused him to be unavailable to his mother and brothers in that example. Another one that came to mind was the story of Jesus with Mary and Martha. And if you remember here Jesus was very, very close to Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And he found out that Lazarus was sick and needed help. And yet John makes it clear that he chose to wait an extra 2 days before going to see Lazarus and to heal him. And the sisters were definitely disappointed that Jesus had not been readily available to them. And so as I think about how can we follow in the footsteps of Jesus in terms of our availability, a few things come to mind. One is that I see Jesus prioritizing the mission that the Father had given him and the men that the Father had entrusted to him. And so those were really the bullseye of he was always going to be available to the work that the Father had given him and to the men, the people that the Father had entrusted to him. And he was often available to others who were willing to seek him out as he was engaged in the mission and as he was investing in the men. But he did not seem to go out of his way to seek those folks out. And so I think that's something that can give us clarity, that can be guardrails for us, is what is the mission that the Lord has called us to? Who are the people that the Lord has entrusted to us? And then trying to meet the needs of others as we are able to. The other thing I see with Jesus is that he lived in constant connection with the Father through the Holy Spirit. And I think I've seen that in my own life, that each day, if I start off the day yielding the day to the Lord, because I don't know what's going to happen, but if I am available to the Lord to guide me and to help me live faithfully to him through all the ups and downs that are going to come my way that day, then I think that gives me the best possibility of disappointing the right people. And, ultimately I want to make sure that the one person I don't disappoint is God. So even if And I think that was Jesus's his ultimate value, was that he was going to follow through with what the Father had given him to do, even if it did mean disappointing others that were close to him. I once heard someone say that there's always enough time to do what God has called you to do. And I think that's true. So if God is giving you a work that he wants you to accomplish, there's always enough time. The problem I think that we often run into is that we've got things that God hasn't called us to do that we end up giving our time to. But yeah, what thoughts do you guys have to add on to that, Abby and Lakeith?
Real quick, I agree with everything you said, Andrew. I thought that was an awesome answer. I think we have to make the best use of our time. So in Luke chapter, I think it's 4, or chapter 2, you'll find Jesus teaching, and he's in the middle of this awesome teaching. There's so many people needs that he's addressing at the moment. And then the roof literally caves in, falls in. There's a guy right in front of him who's in desperate need of his help. And Jesus prioritized that man. He gave him his undivided attention, even though he came at the worst possible time. So just, making the best use of your time. Like, I'm sure the rest of the crowd was disappointed because now this guy's getting this one-on-one connection with Jesus and a fresh pair of legs. So he was happy, but everybody else, was probably disappointed in Jesus because this was the one time where they got to hear him teach. So I guess really just making the best use of your time and trusting God to lead you to that moment when you know.
Yeah. And, Wes, you talked about having responsibilities from work and having a boss. I think that gets back to the render to Caesar thing. So, if your boss has told you that he wants you to be available to respond within a certain amount of time, I mean, that's tough. But what you could do, even with that, you can do some things. So you can set a timer on your phone. So if you have to respond back within an hour, then, if you have to turn your phone on, do not disturb, and then set a reminder at 55 minutes to check to see if a call has come through. You can do that. So you don't have to necessarily be on call the entire time. Maybe you check your email every 3 hours, whatever those windows are. You can still dictate 90% of how you're going to use those time, or how you're going to use that time. So those are just some practical suggestions. But